The zip tie cut into my wrists before I even understood where I was. The room smelled like industrial air conditioning and something else. Something chemical and cold that I could feel pressing against the back of my throat with every breath. I blinked at the concrete ceiling. My head throbbed. The last clear thing I remembered was the hotel lobby in Singapore, my fiancé's warm hand on the small of my back, his voice low and easy, saying, "Wait right here, babe. I'm just going to grab our passports from the front desk." That was somewhere between 2 and 4 hours ago. I had no way of knowing anymore. He'd taken both our phones before he walked away. Then the door opened. My fiancé walked in with another man behind him, and something about the way he moved, the ease of it, no hesitation, no apology in his posture at all, told me what I needed to know before he said a single word. The man behind him was broad-shouldered and completely still in the way that only dangerous people can be still. Not calm, controlled. He wore a charcoal blazer with no tie, and he was holding a black duffel bag that he set on the floor between them without ceremony. Then he waited. My fiancé crouched down and unzipped the bag. From across the room I could see the banded stacks of $100 bills. 300,000, my fiancé said. His voice was so level it made me physically ill, same as we agreed. 3 years. I had been with this man for 3 years. I had driven 9 hours to meet his parents in Columbus. I had sat beside him in the ER at 2 in the morning when he thought he was having a heart attack, and it turned out to be acid reflux. I had rearranged my entire teaching schedule around his firm's holiday parties. I had said yes when he proposed at the park on a Sunday afternoon in October, and I had meant it with everything in me, and now he was standing in a room in Singapore holding a bag of cash and not looking at me. "Zane," my voice came out smaller than I intended. He finally looked up. His eyes held something I'd never seen in them before. Not guilt, not grief, just a flat, tired impatience. Like I was a problem he'd already solved and couldn't understand why I was still making noise. "Don't," he said. "Don't what? Zane, what are you doing?" "What I have to." He stood up and smoothed his jacket. "You want the truth? Here it is. I owe $400,000 to people who don't send invoices. I've been trying to fix it for a year and a half and I ran out of options. You were an option." He picked up the duffel. "You have no savings, no family money, nothing except a kindergarten teacher's salary. I couldn't get anything from you the normal way, but someone else could." He said it the way you'd explain why you sold a car. Reasonable, logical, mildly regretful about the inconvenience. "You have my passport," I said. My voice had gone very quiet. "I know." He turned toward the door. "Don't fight these people. It'll go better for you." He walked out. The door clicked shut behind him with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence, and I was alone with the man in the blazer. He walked toward me without hurrying. He was somewhere around 50, with a face that had seen actual weather, deep lines around his eyes, a jaw that looked like it had been broken once and healed slightly off-center. His eyes were gray-green, and they moved over me the way a person looks at something they're trying to identify, not appraise. It was the strangest thing. With everything that was happening, the way he looked at me was the only part that didn't feel like I was merchandise. He reached out to lift my chin. I pulled back and he stopped. His eyes dropped. They landed on my collarbone, on the coin. It was a military challenge coin on a thin, silver chain, brass, worn smooth on one side from 20 years of hands touching it, the eagle and shield crest of a Special Forces unit just barely readable on the other. I had worn it every single day since I was 19 years old. My aunt had pressed it into my palm at my father's graveside and said, "He wanted you to have this." I had never taken it off. It was the only thing of his I still had. The man in the blazer went absolutely still. He reached toward the coin and stopped himself, his hand suspended an inch away. A muscle worked in his jaw. His whole body had shifted in a way I couldn't have named exactly. Something that had been locked had come loose, and whatever was underneath was raw and large, and trying to hold its shape. "Where did you get that?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. I stared at him. "The coin." His voice had dropped to almost nothing. "Where did you get it?" "My father left it to me," I said. He exhaled through his nose, a hard, controlled sound. His hand dropped. He stepped back a full 3 feet and looked at me with something that I can only describe as devastated recognition. "Your father," he said. "What was his name?" I had no idea what was happening, but something in the way he was standing, something broken open and genuine in a room that had contained nothing genuine until 30 seconds ago, made me answer. "Hargrove," I said, "Colonel Daniel Hargrove." I will never forget what happened to his face. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't shout or reach for me or stagger. His expression just fractured. Quietly, completely, the way ice breaks across a whole surface at once instead of from a single point. He stood there for a long moment, with his palm pressed flat against his mouth, looking at a spot on the wall behind me, and then he closed his eyes. "Hey," I said carefully, "what is happening right now?" He opened his eyes and looked at me, and whatever mask he'd walked in wearing was completely gone. "Your father," he said, "carried me 400 meters through a burning building in Beirut in 2009. I had a sucking chest wound and a leg that wasn't working. He wasn't supposed to survive that night. Neither was I." He stopped. "I have been trying to find his family for 3 years. Then he pulled a folding knife from his jacket pocket and cut the zip tie off my wrists in one clean motion. His name was Harlan Voss. He ran a private security and intelligence firm with offices in London, Singapore, and Dubai, with government contracts in about a dozen countries I'd never had reason to think about. He told me all of this in the back of a black SUV, moving through neighborhoods I didn't recognize, toward a compound outside the city, while I sat with my hands folded carefully in my lap and focused on keeping my breathing even. My father, Voss explained, had been one of 3 co-founders of the company before he died. A training accident, the Army had told us. My aunt had handled all the paperwork. I had been 19, finishing my freshman year, and she had handled everything: the estate, the accounts, the legal filings. She'd told me there wasn't much. An Army pension, a small life insurance payout, a house in Savannah she'd helped me sell. I had believed her entirely, because she was the only family I had. She had raised me alongside my father after my mother left when I was 4. She had been at every school play, every soccer game, every college orientation. I had not had a single reason not to trust her. "How much is the stake worth?" I said. Voss looked at me steadily. "At current valuation, north of 40 million. With the associated trust and the additional assets your father structured before he died." He paused. "Closer to 65 million total." I looked out the window at the Singapore skyline and didn't say anything for a long time. "She knew," I finally said. "We believe she has known for years," Voss said. "She had access to a probate attorney starting in the months after your father's death. The paperwork was filed to redirect his estate stake to a holding company. The intention, as far as we can determine, was to eventually fold that stake into the Westbrook Group." The Westbrook Group, I turned the name over. "They're a competing firm," Voss continued. "Franklin Westbrook has been trying to acquire your father's ownership stake for years through back channels. Under the original partnership agreement, if no legitimate heir ever surfaces to claim the stake, it reverts to the remaining partners. The Westbrooks acquired a controlling interest in the partnership 18 months ago." He paused. "Your fiancé was contacted by a Westbrook associate shortly after that acquisition. They offered him money to remove you from the equation. He didn't ask very many questions about what that meant. 18 months. We had been engaged for 8, which meant my fiancé had said yes to this plan 10 months before he got down on one knee in Forsyth Park with a ring he'd told me he'd saved up for. I sat with that for a while and let it be as heavy as it needed to be. The compound was 40 minutes outside the city, a perimeter fence, A gate that required 2 key card scans, a plain modern house inside that was clean and quiet in a way that felt deliberately calm rather than naturally so. Voss's people brought food and a change of clothes without being asked. His head of operations, a woman named Croft, mid-40s, with the kind of face that seemed constitutionally incapable of surprise, sat across from me at a long table and walked me through 9 years of documents on a secure laptop. The first file was dated 6 weeks after my father's funeral. My aunt's signature was on it. I had stared at her handwriting on so many things over the years. Birthday cards, permission slips, grocery lists pinned to the fridge, and I knew every curve of it. The curly capital D. The way she looped her G's. I had watched her hands make those letters 1,000 times. The wire transfers came later in the file. $200,000 from a Westbrook subsidiary to a personal account in her name in 2018. Then another transfer in 2021. Then a third, 6 months ago, the month before Zane proposed. She's been working with them for years, Croft said, not unkindly, just as a fact. I thought about the morning I left for Singapore. She had come over to help me pack, the way she always did for my longer trips. She had folded my cardigans with that precise inward fold she'd taught me when I was 12. She had stood in my doorway while I zipped my suitcase and said, "Be safe, baby. Call me when you land." And I had hugged her, and I had meant it, and she had known exactly where I was going and why and what would happen when I got there. I texted her from the secure phone Croft handed me. Just, "Can we talk?" She replied in under a minute, "Of course, sweetheart. Everything okay?" I turned the phone face down and pushed it to the center of the table. Voss was watching me. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Before I could answer, the other phone, the one they'd retrieved from Zane's contact with my number, rang with an unfamiliar number. Croft nodded at me. I answered. My best friend's voice came through the line, and she was crying in the particular way that means terror rather than sadness. Tight, shallow, barely controlled. Lottie. She'd been crying long enough that her voice had gone rough. "They took me. I don't know where I am. They said to tell you to come alone. There's a textile mill on the river road. They'll text the address. They said if you bring anyone with you." There was a scuffle, something hitting the floor, and then a different voice, male, completely flat, 2 hours. "No backup. We'll know." The line went dead. Lottie had known me since 7th grade. We had been in each other's weddings, or we were supposed to be. She had nothing to do with any of this. She was a physical therapist from Savannah who loved bad reality television and made the best lemon cake I had ever eaten in my life, and the Westbrooks had grabbed her to use against me because they knew she was the person I would move heaven and earth for. "Don't," Voss said before I could speak. "I know what you're going to say. This is exactly what they want." "I know what they want," I said, "so let's give it to them." Croft put together the plan in 40 minutes. It was clean and specific and left very little to chance. A tracking device sewn into the hem of my jacket, a 12-person team positioned in a half-mile radius, audio monitoring in real time. I would go in exactly as they demanded. Alone, visible, no obvious backup. What the Westbrooks didn't know was that Voss's people were already on the ground before I got within a mile of the building. The mill was a converted textile facility on the edge of an industrial corridor. High ceilings, bare concrete, the smell of old machinery that had been sitting idle long enough to just smell like dust. Franklin Westbrook was standing in the center of it when I walked in. Maybe 60, expensively dressed in the effortless way that comes from having had money long enough to stop thinking about it. He held a glass of water he hadn't touched. Behind him, my best friend was zip-tied to a metal chair with tape across her mouth. When she saw me, she started shaking her head violently, her eyes wide, trying to tell me to leave. I didn't leave. "Daniel Hargrove's daughter," Westbrook said, looking me over. He had the tone of a man who finds most things mildly disappointing. I expected someone with more of a presence. "I get that a lot," I said. It's usually the last thing people underestimate about me. He didn't smile. He set the glass down and folded his hands in front of him. Here is what is going to happen. You are going to sign an affidavit renouncing any claim to your father's estate stake. My attorneys are in a room 2 miles from here with the documents prepared. You sign tonight, your friend goes home, you go home, and this whole situation becomes something that happened to someone else. And if I don't, then I have a great deal of patience and significantly more resources than you do. I looked at my best friend. She was watching me with the specific terror of someone who loves you and is watching you walk into something bad on their behalf. And I held that look for just a second. Long enough to let her see that I was okay, that I had a plan, that she needed to trust me for about 3 more minutes. I'll sign, I said. Westbrook's expression shifted just slightly toward satisfaction. But first you let her go. She walks out that south door, and then I sign whatever you need. He studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded to the man behind my best friend. The zip ties came off, the tape came away, and she gasped like someone surfacing from underwater. I caught her arm as she stumbled forward. The south door, I said quietly. All the way to the road and keep running. Don't look back. She gripped my wrist. I am not. Lottie, I held her eyes. Go. She ran. I waited until I heard the door hit the frame behind her. Then I pressed the button on my watch, one signal the one Croft had shown me in the car, and said, now. Both sets of doors came down simultaneously. Voss's team came through the north and south ends in under 8 seconds, moving with the controlled certainty of people who have done this in places where the stakes were considerably higher than a converted textile mill in Singapore. The room flooded with light and voices and the sound of Westbrook's men dropping their weapons before anyone had to tell them twice. Franklin Westbrook went very still. He looked at me with something that had moved past anger into a grudging, furious recognition. My father built something worth protecting, I told him. You spent 4 years trying to take it from a family that didn't even know it existed. That's over now. I held his gaze. And so is the Westbrook Group. The federal referral went through Voss's legal team and landed with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division within the week. What followed was the kind of institutional process that doesn't make headlines. It's too slow and too procedural, and there's no single dramatic moment where justice lands. But it is thorough. Asset freezes, grand jury filings, a long chain of cooperating witnesses who each needed their own deal. Zane cooperated early and completely, which I was told would likely reduce his sentence. I had no feelings left about that. I had used them all up somewhere over the Pacific on the flight home, and what remained was just a flat, empty space where he used to be. My aunt called me 4 times in the first month. I let all of it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready. I might not be ready for a long time. The thing I kept coming back to was this: I still believed she loved me. I had to believe that, because the alternative was that 27 years of her showing up for me had been theater, and I couldn't make that true. But love alongside a betrayal that size doesn't cancel one out with the other. They just both exist, and I had to let them. Claiming my father's estate took 7 months, 3 attorneys, and enough paperwork that I learned to read a balance sheet purely out of self-defense. I learned things about the company I'd had no framework to imagine. 300 employees. Contracts protecting journalists in conflict zones. Aid workers in unstable regions. Diplomatic staff in countries where the State Department couldn't formally operate. My father had built the whole thing from the ground up in the decade after he left the Army, and he had structured it carefully. Twice, Voss told me, restructuring his stake specifically to ensure that if something happened to him, it would still reach his family. He had been thinking about me for years in ways I never knew. I had a long conversation with Voss about what role, if any, I wanted in the company. He was direct about it. The company was functioning well, had strong leadership, and didn't need me to run it. If I wanted to receive my inheritance, engage through trustees, and never set foot in an operations meeting, that was entirely legitimate. He said this without any pressure in either direction, and I appreciated it. I asked for 3 weeks to think. Then I called him back and said I wanted to learn. He said, "Good." And then, after a pause that felt like it held a lot of weight he wasn't putting into words, he would have said the same thing. I'm still a kindergarten teacher. I want to say that clearly because it matters to me. My class this year has 23 kids, including one girl who has decided that fractions are a personal attack, and one boy who brings a different stuffed animal every Monday to introduce to the class. I walk into that room every morning, and they come at me like I'm the most important thing in the building, and I am not giving that up for anything. But 3 evenings a week, I sit in on calls with attorneys, operations analysts, and risk consultants who are slowly, patiently teaching me a language I should have grown up speaking. It's hard, it's often confusing. I stay up past midnight, reading financial disclosures that give me a headache by the second page. I don't mind any of it. It feels like something that was always mine, waiting on a shelf I didn't know existed, and I am getting to it at my own pace. The coin is still on its chain around my neck. Brass, smooth on one side, the crest worn but legible on the other. I wore it for 9 years because it was the only piece of him I had. Now I know it was also the thing that saved my life. Not because of its financial or symbolic value, but because my father put it in my aunt's hands at his own funeral with instructions to give it to me. Which means somewhere in him, he knew. He was always 4 steps ahead. He spent his whole career thinking about contingencies, and he loved me enough to make me one of them. I'm not finished being angry about the years I didn't know who he was. I'm not finished grieving the father I understood as a daughter rather than a person. That's going to take a long time, maybe longer than I can see from here. But I get up every morning and I move forward, and when I'm scared, which is real, I hold on to the thing Voss told me my father used to say to his team on the worst nights. Fear means you still have something to lose. Get scared and then get moving. He made it up, Voss confirmed that, but it worked every single time. I have a lot to lose now, my father made sure of that. And I am not letting go of a single piece of it.